Welcome to today's webinar, The End of Working Poverty Strategies, which is part of our webinar series on ending working poverty. My name is Paul Bourne, and I'm the co-CEO of Tamarack Institute and the founder and director of Vibrant Communities. I'm here to introduce our discussion today with Jane Paquin from Penn Financial Credit Union, Prosper Canada's Liz Mulholland, and Tom Cooper from Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. I can't think of three people that I'd rather be having this conversation with. Jane is Director of Human Resources at Penn Financial Credit Union, a values-based financial cooperative committed to transforming how banking is done to improve lives and strengthen communities in the Niagara Peninsula. With over 20 years experience in human resources, Jane's passion for learning and coaching fosters a cultural commitment to improving the lives of employees through authentic relationships, leadership development, coaching, and leveraging strength. Now, you're going to hear a great story of why Penn Financial Credit Union has decided to pay a living wage and beyond. Liz is the CEO of Prosper Canada, a national charity dedicated to expanding economic opportunity for Canadians living in poverty through program and policy innovation. Liz joined Prosper Canada in 2011 after a decade of independent public policy consulting and 5 years as the Senior Director of Social Development in the Office of the Prime Minister, providing strategic direction on national, social, and health policy issues. Liz is going to give us some really good insights into the groundbreaking work of Prosper and the idea that financial thinking and financial planning is an important part of poverty reduction, financial literacy, as they'll talk it through. Tom is the director of the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. He's a power horse. He's an amazing thinker about social policy and social change, and has been one of the driving forces behind Ontario's basic income pilot. The Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction is one of the signature members of Vibrant Communities. There from day one when we started. A collaborative organization formed to tackle the city's unacceptable levels of poverty. Now, Tom also co-founded the Ontario Living Wage Network and was involved in helping to establish Ontario's first basic income pilot. So welcome to all three of you, and I'm so looking forward to having a conversation with you. I'm going to start by just giving you a bit of context. Now, we are planning to run a three-part series on the end of working poverty. Personally, I have a deep, deep belief that if you work, you should not be poor. I fundamentally believe that all Canadians agree with this. The debate, though, is deeper than working or not working. And the deeper questions are part of what we want to talk about here in this series. What are some hopeful signs? How do we actually begin to tackle this idea of working poor? Just to give you a sense. The poverty rate in Canada is 1 in 7 people. Now, you can debate that all you want. It's around 14%. And it's the low income measure after tax. They call it LIM-AT. Lots of debate about what poverty is, but let's just say there's a lot of people living in poverty in Canada. Now, the working poor are an interesting segment. Nearly half, 48% of Canadians living in poverty are working poor. Think about that. If we ended working poverty in Canada, we would eliminate 50% of our poverty. We would be down at around 7% people living in poverty. Now we could get really creative. 1/3 of the working poor have full-time, full-year jobs. The rest are part-time or part-year workers, such as seasonal employees working full-time for part of the year. Now, these jobs are not all bad, and not everyone chooses full-time work. But the reality is that many of those who are working part-time, part-year would like full-time work. Women are strongly or predominant amongst full-year part-time low-income workers. Men are predominant amongst part-year full-time workers, maybe in forestry or fishing industry, agriculture, that sort of thing. The household composition of people living in working poverty: single females, 19%, female lone parent families, 16%, single males, 15%. There's a lot of reasons why we need to tackle working poverty. One of the most important ones is that as the economy is changing, this issue will become more important. The vast majority of working poor are in the service industry. Interestingly enough, if we were to do something as simple as increase wages, create incentives for full year employment, and that would have to be obviously a mix of public and private support and a partnership. Our belief, or at least mine directly, is that it's not a competitiveness issue. Ending working poverty doesn't make Canada less competitive. Some would say more competitive. It is basically, as far as I'm concerned, an inflation issue. We increase the wages of workers, we increase the cost of goods that they provide, and we end working poverty. We do that over a period of time. It seems fairly straightforward. Is it? We're going to talk about that some more. First, I'm going to bring up Jane from Penn Financial Credit Union. Jane's going to talk about why living wage and feasibility of providing a living wage as a business is important, and how they have done it as an organization. Welcome, Jane. Tell us your story.
Thanks, Paul. Very inspiring and great to set that context for everyone. So thank you, everyone, for having us. I am very proud to say that Penn Financial Credit Union became a certified living wage employer in July of 2018. And actually, at the time, unfortunately, we operate in the Niagara region. We were only one of 7 certified living wage employers in the Niagara region. So since that time, we've done a lot, frankly, to educate ourselves about reducing poverty in Niagara. And we've chosen the living wage as one very strategic initiative to contribute to the communities that we live in. So we're really thrilled. We've been working very closely with advocacy groups such as the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network and other great advocates in Niagara to really promote the living wage and help others. What we found when we promoted the fact that we were committed to becoming a certified living wage employer was that many other businesses, frankly, just didn't have an awareness about what a living wage is. So we've taken on a bit of an advocacy role to help to explain to others that being a living wage employer means that we pay our employees the amount specified by the Living Wage Network, which is how we got certified, that essentially allows all of our employees to cover the actual cost to live and participate in their community. So helping them recognize that minimum wage is not enough. It really needs to be a living wage. This really became important to us because, as Paul said earlier, there's more and more people facing the reality that it's becoming harder to cover bills, rent, food for children, all of those necessities, frankly, that living outside of poverty requires. So we don't think that's right. We really wanted to put a stake in the ground to become a certified living wage employer. And not only does that mean that we are currently paying all of our employees at least the living wage, but it keeps us accountable to ensure that we'll continue continue to pay a living wage into the future. So you can see there our mission, which is essentially to improve lives and strengthen communities, really supports this. And it's not just a poster on the wall for us. We strive to consistently bring the mission to life in all that we do. We're very proud that in combination with a lot of these other groups that we've been advocating with, that we're seeing some traction in the Niagara region, and the number of living wage employers actually, as of today, is now over 12, and our understanding is that there are 4 more in the works. So awareness is increasing, which is a really great story to tell. So our truly local commitment, which is essentially the heart and soul of Penn Financial's philosophy, really articulates for not only our members, but all of the community at large, that we truly believe that the prosperity of our members and our community go hand in hand. So the truly local commitment basically defines what our unique value proposition is and what our philosophy is. So we're committed to making sure that we do everything possible to reduce poverty in Niagara. And one of the particular strategies that we use is becoming a champion level certified living wage employer. So what that means is, in addition to our employees being paid at the living wage, that we also do everything possible to hire third-party companies that also pay their employees the living wage. So really trying to advocate that. Another pillar within our truly local commitment is to work collaboratively to address challenges like poverty, homelessness, through other initiatives that really are at grassroots level. So right now we've got something called Socks for Change, which is to end poverty feet first, essentially. So we have, unfortunately, a number of residents in Niagara that frankly don't have warm socks. So we're striving to donate great quality winter socks that will keep those who are suffering from poverty in Niagara warm this winter. We distribute them through various organizations in the community, and it's just another example of how we can join together with the community at a grassroots level to promote initiatives that really do help to reduce poverty. Some of them may be smaller than others, but as Paul mentioned earlier, the living wage really is kind of a broader level commitment that we've seen some ongoing traction. So you'll see in the next slide that we really, in promoting poverty reduction strategies such as the living wage, we've done so through social media channels, really to promote awareness. And one of the outcomes of this that we actually didn't necessarily expect is that we gained a lot of we created knowledge from those who may not have had any knowledge of what living wage is. So now there's a real greater understanding and awareness of what the living wage is. We're inspiring other businesses to really consider becoming a living wage employer, and to go through the process. I think some people assume is a, cumbersome process. I can truly say that it is not. It is something that they've made, it's very simple from an employer perspective, and is really worth investigating. So if you want more information, please do reach out to your living wage networks to find out more information about this. The other thing that I'll say from a strategic rationale, and the reason we did it was to support our mission and our values. So we are a values-based financial cooperative. It supports our philosophy. What I will say, though, from a business perspective, is that if you are a business out there kind of considering, well, what is the strategic rationale for this? How do I get either board members or other business partners on board to really stand behind the living wage? And really, from that perspective, our why was that it aligned with our values-based financial cooperative philosophy, but also to make sure that from other businesses' perspective, it really does become a differentiator. So if as a business you're looking to differentiate yourself among, we all live in very competitive environments, the living wage is actually a great example of something that does create a defined differentiator. You'll see on the next slide too, it also creates what we call a common purpose. So not only are we extremely proud of being a living wage employer as the employer itself, but what we heard from our members, our employees, is that they share this pride with us. So it's really created a positive, not only loyalty, but real pride in what we're doing for our Niagara communities. We also want to continue to look at this as an obligation. So I will challenge everyone out there as employers, regardless of what your role is in the community, to see living wage as not just an opportunity, but as an obligation. As employers that are, earning incomes and have the ability to contribute, that we should really ask each other, why not? Why wouldn't we consider joining this movement and becoming a living wage employer? So I hope that by sharing our story, we've been able to inspire others to become living wage certified, regardless of the communities that you operate in. We're going to send out a video link after the webinar, which I would encourage you to watch, but it basically also is our way, we call it our Penn Financial rally cry, but essentially it's to encourage others to imagine what it would be like to live in an environment that is thriving, where we could actually eradicate poverty and strive to keep that top of mind so that we can truly integrate these socially responsible ideas into everything that we do to address the challenges and barriers that create this ongoing challenge for those that live in poverty. So
Jane, thank you so much. What an inspiring story. And I got to admit, when I watched your video, I had a big smile on my face. It's fabulous. And I encourage people to watch it after the show today. Jane, I'm really inspired. The Tamarack Institute is also a living wage employer, and we bank with the Kindred Credit Union here in Waterloo, and they are also a living wage employer. So it's a strong movement. But talk to me a little bit about, how does living wage affect your employees? How does it make their lives better?
well, it certainly provides them that opportunity to have, as you say, that sustainable income. So they know that we're committed to ensuring the way that the living wage is set is to ensure that, as I mentioned earlier, that they not only have money for basic necessities, but the living wage is set so that they can also enjoy things like a modest vacation, recreation, childcare, those types of things. We want them to be active members and be able to participate in the communities that we live in, because that's so important, frankly, to all of us to truly be, and I think thriving is a word that we continue to use, that we want our employees to thrive, not just survive. So to us, that really is the difference in paying a living wage as opposed to a minimum wage.
What a wonderful way to describe it. And I think often, Jane, that we want thriving communities. And what some people don't realize is that all of the people in the community must be thriving in order for the community to truly thrive.
Absolutely.
How do you stay competitive paying these extra wages? You must be paying more than other financial institutions then.
Yes, actually, we are currently the only financial institution in Niagara that is paying a living wage. Again, I'll say though that it's part of our obligation. So we really don't look at it as something that's optional. As an employer who is committed to contributing and strengthening the communities in which we operate, we look at it as our obligation to ensure that employees are thriving. So I think it's that almost reframing it when you look at it from that paradigm, that it's not about, how do you afford to do this? It's that, frankly, just like a lot of other things on our, expenses and things that we have to plan for, we plan to pay a living wage and we incorporate it into our budget on an annual basis.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And we'll get back to you later on in the show and ask you some questions with the panel. Thanks for your presentation. We're going to move on to Liz Mulholland. It's interesting, when we were interviewing Liz in getting ready for the show, she said, Paul, I'm not an expert in living wage. And yet she's one of the great policy thinkers in our country and has worked in positions of power that have put her in touch with how to improve the quality of life of Canadians. She's been heading up for the last while, and we're just honored that she is taking her organization, Prosper Canada, to new heights, helping us to understand the importance of financial literacy as a poverty reduction tool. Liz, tell us your story.
Thanks very much, Paul. I'm feeling a little surge of imposter syndrome right now, but I'm going to work through it. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk about this challenge, how we end working poverty. So I'll talk a little bit about Prosper Canada, because that's the story that really counts. So we are a national charity, as you pointed out, that's focused on expanding economic opportunity for Canadians who live in poverty. But through program and policy innovation, we're not a direct service organization. Everything we do is through partnerships and leveraging. And our job is really kind of finding those transformative ideas that can really move the dial for people with low incomes, and then developing those ideas, testing them in the field, and then scaling them up sustainably. So not an easy path that we've chosen, but one that really brings great rewards. So, and we do this by really partnering with community, business, government, and also academic organizations to develop, test, and sustainably scale these. And it could be financial policies, programs, products, services, anything that will enable people with low incomes to really build their financial well-being in very measurable ways. So I think this ties in nicely to what we've just heard from Jane, you know, focusing on how employers can pay a living wage is a really important critical building block. Our work is not an alternative to those types of strategies or the ones we're going to hear about later. It's a complement. We see financial empowerment really as working in tandem with these other approaches to amplify their impact and to also fill a critical missing gap in what we see as Canada's social infrastructure. So if you look at the slide in front of you, when we talk about financial empowerment, which is really what we're focused on these days, it's really about a set of interventions that have been shown when they're delivered in the right way in coordination with other supports can really measurably improve financial well-being for people with low incomes and the working poor included in that group. So I'll just quickly run through. The first pillar, as we call it, is really good quality, neutral, non-commercial financial information, education, and counseling. And by non-commercial, I don't mean that it can't be delivered by a bank or credit union, but it's not about selling you a product. And really tailored for the needs of people with low incomes because their financial lives are not the same as the financial lives, and the challenges and opportunities they have in front of them are not the same as middle income people necessarily or higher income. So things really need to be tailored for the folks that you're talking to. And then the second pillar is really about connecting people to government income benefits and tax credits. And typically this takes a form of tax filing assistance and one-on-one help to complete benefit applications, but also to sort out benefit issues. When issues crop up, people get cut off their benefits, helping them to get back on. The third bucket is really around connecting people to safe and affordable financial products and services, like the ones I'm sure that Jane offers. This is really about helping people find the right products and services for them and helping to steer people away from alternative financial services that are really high risk and high cost, and that can end up plunging people into very serious escalating debt. The fourth pillar is really around connecting people to savings and asset building opportunities. We all know that savings give us that added bit of cushion in our lives, and I'll talk about that a little bit more specifically in a moment. But also having those financial assets or other types of assets, our human capital, investing in a business or our own education and training, that these are actually pathways out of poverty. So very important. Income alone is not the route out of poverty. People need assets as well. And finally, consumer education protection. And a lot of that work is more around advocacy work around policy and regulation, but some of it is also working on the education front. So in short, financial empowerment is really about, depending on where you're starting out on the spectrum, from just mere survival where you may be in financial crisis to helping people move towards stabilizing so they're reaching a point where they're able to make ends meet every month if they're careful and prudent and manage their money actively, towards really engaging with their broader financial picture in the longer term, then really starting to save and invest to build their security, growing assets, all with the goal of moving towards actual prosperity. And I love Jane's word. It's about really helping people to thrive and participate and be fully included. So moving on from there, when it comes to ending working poverty, we see really important connections between this work and what the other panelists and Tamarack the types of opportunities that they're pursuing. So I'm going to touch on a few important connections that I want to highlight today, and then I really look forward to people's questions on that. And there are many more I could talk about, but Paul's only given me a few minutes. So first one is tax filing and connecting people to their benefits. So first priority, if people are working and they're low income, is to try and get their income up. So we estimate conservatively that probably over $1.5 billion in income benefits for people with low incomes across Canada just lapse every year. They do not flow to those people because they experience barriers to tax filing or connecting those benefits in some way. And for people who are low income and working, some key benefits that really can make a big difference are the Canada Child Benefit. If they have children, that can be worth more than $6,000 per child. It varies depending on the age. There's a GST tax credit that's nice, hefty payment. And then the Canada Worker Benefit, which can be as high as over $2,300 for a household. So these are important opportunities, and so we need to ensure that people who are working poor in our communities both know about these benefits and that they have access to free community tax filing and benefits assistance if they need it to tax file or to access those benefits. And we've been working with 14 community partners across Canada running some large-scale pilots. And the reason we know this works is because in just about 4 years, they've been able to connect 229,000 people with low income across Canada to over $269 million in new income through this tax filing and one-on-one help with people accessing their benefits. And on average, when people who are low income do get tax filed, their income goes up by $3,400 in our pilots. So that's a lot of money. And then people who haven't filed for a number of years, when you back file them, then you can get into some very large numbers with lump sum payments that are in the tens of thousands of dollars, which really are a transformative, life-changing opportunity for many people who receive those payments, because it means they might be able to take a year and go back to school, get some job training, etc., things that can really help to move out of low-wage work and into something that's more sustainable for them. So we also know when we talk about tax filing in our business, we call it the golden moment because tax refunds are actually typically the largest lump sum of cash that a low-income household will receive over the year. And therefore, it's a really important opportunity for them to be able to pay down debts that they may have accumulated, but also to build some emergency savings. And if you look at the slide that you have in front of you now, oh, sorry, that's the right one. We know from research that the TD Bank conducted, which we're extremely grateful for. This was groundbreaking research in Canada. They actually looked at the experience of Canadian workers and to what degree they experience income volatility. So we knew from research in the United States that because of the rise of precarious work, people who were working in that way tended to experience very volatile incomes, meaning their incomes fluctuate in both the amount and in the timing, their flow, and that this created a lot of financial problems for people. And in Canada, that affects almost 4 in 10 Canadians, 37% of working age adults. And we know that the rate is much higher amongst low-income working adults. So, so what happens is people have unpredictable incomes, it creates cash flow problems, and what happens is it results in months when their incomes dip, but their expenses remain high, or they might even have an expense spike. You know, the car broke down, the washing machine broke, somebody had to get some expensive medication. And when this happens, if we go to the next slide, we know that people with low incomes who are working experience negative consequences of that at a higher rate because they have low income. So you see here that,
Liz,
you know, sorry, go ahead.
No, this is fabulous. And it kind of lets me segue into Tom and, you know, the basic income. And I'm going to come back to you with some
Great.
bigger questions.
Great.
But, you know, what's interesting about your work, and maybe this is controversial, but, you know, we're not going to end working poverty just because employers are going to pay a living wage. Employees also have a responsibility. And part of what you're saying is that there are all of these supports out there that if people that are working below the poverty line can access. And by accessing these and by increasing their financial literacy and doing good financial planning and work, they contribute themselves to moving out of poverty. And it really helps me to better understand that if we're going to end working poverty, it's really a public-private partnership in a sense. And there's responsibilities on all sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
fabulous work and fabulous story. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
We're going to move on to Tom, who is with Hamilton's Roundtable on Poverty Reduction and also being one of the great advocates for the basic income, has done a remarkable job rallying Canadians, and also has been extremely active in the living wage movement. Tom, tell us your story, and then let's take some time as a panel to talk to each other about this important topic. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Paul. And certainly, I really saw the benefits of the living wage movement when I first learned about it, and that was probably about 10 years ago. But I've since become a bit of a convert to the idea of basic income. And really, I think it could be perhaps the most profound social policy change in our country of the 21st century. So I want to talk a little bit about the experiment we're still currently running in Ontario, at least until March, and really look at how a basic income can complement, and I think both Liz and Jane talked about this, complement other public policies and other initiatives to reduce workplace poverty. So Ontario launched a basic income pilot in late 2017, and we have currently around 4,500 participants in the communities of Hamilton and Brantford, as well as in Northern Ontario and Thunder Bay, and in Lindsay, which is a smaller town in Eastern Ontario. And the pilot was intended to run for 3 years, but as many on this call will probably know, it was canceled. It was canceled early after the election of a new provincial government in this province, and after only 1 year. And so while we did have initial baseline surveys conducted with all of the participants to find out what their lives were like prior to joining the basic income pilot, we unfortunately didn't have that same rigorous evaluation done with the oversight of the government after a year. And now we're starting to capture some of those stories, and we have academic institutions and advocacy organizations really trying to learn more about how the basic income really changed people's lives. But one of the important ideas around launching this basic income pilot was to test how people's lives would be improved or changed from a health and mental health outcome perspective, how people might stabilize their housing, and I think importantly for our conversation today, how basic income connected to the workforce and either encourage people to work or maybe did the opposite. One thing we knew about basic income participants, thanks to the baseline survey, is that about 35% of all pilot participants were working when they enrolled in the pilot, and 13% had more than one job. And so for these individuals, they were experiencing working poverty. The basic income pilot was really earmarked for people earning a low income, but for whom they hoped we could start to see some policies put in place to move people out of poverty. So let's move to the next slide. If we break down these numbers, 53% of all basic income participants were in the workforce. And as I mentioned, 35% were actively employed, working but not earning enough at their jobs to pull themselves or their families out of poverty. They were the working poor. We even had some basic income pilot participants who were self-employed and owned their own business. So about 16.3% of them were self-employed. And close to another 20% of basic income participants were actively looking for work. So they didn't have a job at the time they enrolled in the basic income pilot. One of the important, I think, realizations from this pilot was that there are a large number of people with disabilities who are in the workforce, but they face challenges. They face systemic challenges as well as certainly health challenges as well. And one thing the basic income provided was really a financial top-up for people who maybe couldn't work a full 35 or 40-hour week. And for them, basic income was absolutely instrumental in providing that financial foundation so that people could purchase healthy food, for example, make sure they get the medical care they need, and as well stabilize their housing. Next slide, please. The basic income experiment wasn't the only experiment of its type in Canada, though. Back in the 1970s, as many people on the call may know, there was another basic income experiment in Canada, in Manitoba, and that ran for almost 5 years. And unfortunately, that program was cut short as well. But we do know some results from it, thanks to Evelyn Forget, who is a health economist at the University of Manitoba. She went through 1,800 boxes of data about 20 years after the pilot ended, and really learned some phenomenal things about that experiment. What we learned is that the working poor saw a substantial increase in their income thanks to basic income, and there was little reduction in full-time work amongst people who were working full-time. What we did see is sometimes new moms would stay at home a little bit longer after giving birth and not return to the workforce immediately out of financial necessity. And we also saw, as a result of the MINCOME experiment, students staying in school longer and instead of necessarily going out to get a job immediately and try to support the family. And as one MINCOME pilot participant said, I wasn't stuck in the system. I combined my wages and income, and I was able to make ends meet. And that was very much, I think, the story that we started to see here in Ontario as well. There's a very similar program in Alaska called the Alaska Permanent Dividend Fund, and those results have also demonstrated that there isn't a decrease in employment by people receiving a basic income. Next slide, please. So we have some stories that we've collected thanks to fabulous work of basic income volunteers, and we're starting to share those stories. So the couple, for those who are able to follow on the internet, the picture I have up is of a couple in Lindsay who own their own business, and they said basic income helped us further develop our business by reducing the financial stress of bills at home while raising their 4 young children. Another basic income participant said, BI alleviated my stress when my income wasn't enough each month. I'm precariously employed. I'm a full-time student and a beginning manual therapist in my community. Next slide, please. So we very much wanted to see whether basic income was still applicable to the 21st century as a social policy. And we know, as we see more and more jobs becoming automated and the potential for that down the road, BI as a public policy is going to become even more important. For those seeing the slides, the gentleman in the top left hand of the screen, his name is James. He's from my community of Hamilton. He was working in the banking sector and quickly saw his job being taken over by a bank of automated tellers. And he was fortunate to get on the basic income pilot, and he's used his resources through basic income to start a business of his own and really launch into the entrepreneurial career that he wanted. And Ontario's pilot is really being watched all over the world. We've had interest from Japan and from Europe. Really, as automation grows and the potential for job loss becomes a potential reality, people see basic income as really that solid financial foundation that not only won't allow that will allow people to be able to purchase those basic necessities in their lives, keep their housing, purchase healthy food, but it also keeps the economy going, because when people have that disposable income, they can spend money in the community. Next slide, please. And that's why we've seen business leaders here in Canada, Floyd Marinescu, who is started a initiative of 120 CEOs here in Canada. He said, we see a guaranteed basic income as a business-friendly approach to address the increasing financial precarity of our citizens and revitalize the economy. And this issue has certainly been talked about by other prominent business leaders around the world. Elon Musk has talked about the opportunities of basic income. And there's even a presidential candidate in the United States, Andrew Yang, who is an entrepreneurial business person and is really running on a platform of universal basic income. Next slide, please. So there's lots more to talk about basic income, and I'd certainly encourage listeners to take a look at our website and Basic Income Canada website to learn a little bit more. There's a slide here with some books that you might be interested in reading that goes a little bit deeper on these issues, but certainly happy to answer any questions and engage a little bit more discussion on this. Thanks, Paul.
Tom, I wanted to touch base with you here on this excellent presentation. And I wanted to also just let people know that if you do have a question, post it in the chat line. We already have a number there. And I'm going to be presenting this to the panel in just a moment. But Tom, talk to me about the future, like your understanding of the future of work and the role that guaranteed basic incomes can play. I know that you've already started on that, and it was an excellent point you made. Just take it a little bit further. Why does this have such widespread buy-in? I mean, we've got all these business leaders, and at the front slide, you had a conservative government that was proposing it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the leaders in getting the idea of basic income going here in Ontario was former Senator Hugh Segal, who was a former chief of staff to a conservative prime minister and conservative premier. He really saw basic income as an opportunity to ensure people had the freedom, I think, and dignity to ensure that they had the resources to continue to contribute in society and in the economy. We know unfortunately the current social assistance system here in Ontario, certainly, and I think I can safely say is the case in many other places as well, is broken. It doesn't offer a dignified approach to income security. I think basic income provides a different direction, and it really works very collaboratively with other social policies like a living wage. We know living wage can have a profound impact on employees' well-being. But we also know that it's becoming more and more difficult for employees to get the number of hours that maybe we saw in the past. And so we see prevalence of contract work. We see growing part-time positions and fewer and fewer full-time stable jobs. And so there's going to be periods of time between those jobs in which people will need income security. And if basic income can serve as a support for people during those times of precarity, I think it would certainly benefit those individuals. It would ensure that people wouldn't fall into deep poverty as a result of a job loss or the finish of a contract. And it would ensure that we can continue to keep the economy rolling as well, as that's quite an important factor, I think, for those CEOs I mentioned.
Marvelous. Thanks, Tom. It just, all three of you and your presentations are stimulating all kinds of thought for me. I'm particularly just taken by the fact that if we're going to end working poverty, there's a role for all of us. There's a role for employers. There's a role for employees. There's a role for government. There's a role for education. And it just seems somehow if we all work together, we could find a path forward that could reduce poverty by 50% and reduce it for people who are working and bettering their lives. So it's an exciting moment for me. I'm going to start with a question for Liz Mulholland. Liz, talk to me a little bit about the government's commitment generally to providing a whole variety of income supports to help people who might be working poor.
And which level of government are you interested in?
Well, that's it, right? It's interesting that it works at all levels, but I'm particularly most familiar with the federal government.
Sure.
They happen at both levels, and I just love that you brought this segue in about tax filing and why tax filing is so incredibly important for anyone who is working poor.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paul. So I would say, over the past 20 plus years, federal and provincial governments have actually been working quite a bit together, even though it doesn't sound like it often, to actually build a much more robust income security system in some respects. And I think chiefly where we've made huge progress is around families with children. So the Canada Child Benefit is now a very rich benefit. It didn't start out that way when we first brought it in back in the 90s, but it was always intended that it would grow over time. And that has been, the feds have worked with the provinces to kind of dovetail their child benefits with that to try and optimize. So that's worked really well. I think our seniors benefits have improved in the sense that we've strengthened the CPP, and it's an insurance program, but it's growing. People are going to be putting more in, but they'll be getting more out. At the same time as the old age security is improved, and they've actually automated take up of that. So if you're tax filing, it'll automatically, if you qualify, sign you up for it. You don't have to fill out extra forms, etc., which should improve take up, which is great. So in essence, I mean, thinking about the presentation we just heard, really, we have a basic income for seniors in Canada, and we have a basic income for families with children in Canada. What we're missing is a basic income for working age adults who don't have children. So in that sense, I think we've done a good job. A lot of the issues we're focusing on now are just the hurdles that some people experience in trying to access those benefits. Many of us take tax filing for granted. It's kind of an annoying thing you have to do once a year. It's not too hard. You get the software, you're done in a couple of hours. But if you're low income, if you're somebody who's housebound with a disability, if you have literacy, numeracy, language barriers, if you don't have access to a secure computer, or you're not comfortable working on a computer, if you don't understand the language in the tax code, or you get a lengthy letter from CRA that you don't understand, there's often, people really struggle, and many low-income people don't know that there are benefits there for them, so they don't tax file, or they find tax filing too daunting, so they don't. So even, if people are financially literate, which many low-income people are, they may still need some hands-on help. We all need hands-on help with our finances at some point. People who have money pay professionals for that service.
Exactly.
People who don't have money often don't have any place to go in their community, and that's the gap we're trying to fill.
You are doing an amazing job, Liz. Thank you for all of that. Jane, we have a bunch of questions that have come in. You inspired all kinds of people. Two of them in particular. What is the living wage certification process like? And they were kind of interested in what the different levels might be, but also what goes into the calculation of a living wage.
Sure, thank you. And I'm going to defer to the experts in this area in that there is for essentially the Ontario Living Wage Network is the best resource to link up with, to connect with, to find out the details for your particular region, because it does depend on region. So I don't want to be evasive in any way, but from that perspective, I'm certainly not an expert. What I can say from an employer's perspective is when we reached out to our living wage the Ontario Living Wage Network was able to provide basically a step-by-step process for us. So it helped us to understand that the living wage incorporates not only the basic wage, but for example, a proportion that we pay towards benefits. For example, I'm just using that as one of the examples. So I would certainly encourage any employers who are interested to reach out to their living wage networks and get specific information based on their region. And what we found was that it was such a collaborative process. Essentially, it involved, several conference calls. We gathered information, then we had to submit the information, obviously, to be reviewed and approved. But I really want to stress the fact that it is not a burdensome process. It really is something that they work with you. And I believe that most employers would find it is certainly worth the investment.
Fantastic. And just for those of you who want those details, go to www.ontariolivingwage.com. That's ontariolivingwage.com. And they've got just about all the answers that you're ever going to need about setting up a living wage. And if you're from other parts of Canada, there's even links to those others, or just email us and we'll find you that information. Let's keep going with the questions that we have in front of us. Lisa Patterson asks, as there have been several pilots across several decades, is there enough information to implement, or are there reasons for hesitating to implement a basic income? Tom?
Thanks, Paul. And I saw Lisa's question and I did respond. So I think, as Liz noted, we do have basic income-like social policies that are working here in Canada through the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors and the Canada Child Benefit for low-income families with kids. We know there will be a price tag associated with implementing a universal basic income. The Parliamentary Budget Officer came out with a number last year that showed it would be around 42 billion a year, I believe. But that's assuming that we continue with all of the systems we currently have in place. So for example, if you broke those numbers down, it might cost 17 billion here in Ontario, but we're already paying 13 billion for our social assistance system. When you factor in the incredible cost savings actually of bringing in a basic income to improve health, we'd see cost reductions to our healthcare system. We'd see cost reductions in other facets of society in terms of what we always see in terms of lost education potential. So I think basic income is an investment. I think what we need is maybe not more data necessarily, because I think experiments here in Canada and all over the world have demonstrated that a basic income works. What we really need is the political will to make it reality.
Tom, thanks so much. Thanks also to you, Jane and Liz. We are running to the end of the show, and I apologize. I could keep going for a while now. Good news is we have 2 more coming up, and we'll be sending out that information to all the listeners in order to just strengthen your understanding and commitment to ending working poverty in Canada. To all 3 of you, thank you for being leaders on this work in the country. Canadians are forever grateful, and you're at the beginning of something very, very important.
Thank you, Paul.
And if we had time, there would be a standing ovation if you could see the audience. So welcome. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thanks very much, Paul. So you can stay in touch with the Tamarack Institute and Vibrant Communities Canada. Receive the latest thinking, news, tools, and resources from the network by signing up to receive our Cities Reducing Poverty's bi-monthly newsletter or visiting the online learning community at www.tamarack.ca/Cities Reducing Poverty. You can join us in Toronto coming up in March. You'll be immersed in collective impact content that will increase your ability to train others by providing you with the capacity to build your learning at your leadership tables and community volunteers. Registration link is at the bottom of your screen. Max Hardy, a leading voice on the use of deliberative democracy and community change work, will be joining us on a webinar all the way from Australia to share his insights and experience to help you develop your community engagement toolkit while taking the people first approach. The registration link, again, is at the bottom of your screen. And then finally, we have a workshop coming up that will bring together over 250 community and neighborhood development practitioners to explore the use of asset-based community development and explore leading neighborhood revitalization techniques. Again, the registration link is at the bottom of your screen. Finally, we would like to just thank you, everybody, for being with us. Really excited to have you back on the call with us over the next couple of months with our follow-up calls. If you have any feedback on today's webinar, you can email rute@tamarackcommunity.ca. We are always trying to improve the experience. So thank you again for joining us, for asking your great questions, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks to everyone on the Tamarack team for your great work. And we'll see all of you in the next few weeks as we put another one of these together.